Hey friend, Graham here from the recordingrevolution.com. Today, let's make your mixes sound better. Okay, I want to walk through the top 5 mixing mistakes that I see on all kinds of mixes, whether it's through my coaching or students from the Recording Revolution, or if it was Graham years and years ago. I know these well because I've made them all. The point of today's video is to help identify these 5 mistakes so that you can then stop making them if you are, or implement the strategies tied to what I'm teaching you today to enhance your mixes. I'm going to go through them briefly, and this should give you a lot to chew on your next mix, but I think it'll be very, very helpful for you. So let's start with number 5. The number 5 mistake that I see made in a lot of mixes, especially from people in a home studio, is they forget about gain staging or improper gain staging. What do I mean by that? I simply mean you cannot take the tracks that you've recorded or someone else recorded and sent to you. You cannot take those tracks and leave them as is before you mix. You have to go through and make sure all the levels of the actual audio files and MIDI files or what have you are at an appropriate level before you start to throw plugins on them and run them to your master fader. Because if they are too loud, if they're too hot, then you will overload your plugins. You actually will skip your plugins sweet spot. Yes, a lot of plugins have a sweet spot and a desirable level at which they should operate. And in general, you'll send too much of a signal through your mix bus and just really oversaturate your converters in a way that they really don't sound their best. So to get your mix to sound its best, one simple thing you can do, this is why I talk about gain staging a lot because it's so easy to do, it really will help your mixes sound better, is to simply pull down the level of any tracks on the actual track itself, not the fader, but the actual audio itself before you do any plugins. And what I want to show you is on this song here, how I've done that already on a lot of these tracks. Let's look at this kick drum track. If you see here, right here in Pro Tools, this is showing me that I have pulled the volume of this clip, this audio, down 5.6 dB, meaning the real level is there. That was the level that was sent to me. And if you just look at where it's peaking, okay, not horrible. And actually, you can get away with higher peaks on drums. I'm a fan, though, of bringing everything down. So really, I brought that actual audio down minus 5.6 dB. And that's not an arbitrary amount. It's just I'm visually looking at the meters and pulling the track down here on the clip level, the actual audio level, and making sure that I'm not really peaking past 75% of the way up the meter. I like to be around 50% of the way up the meter to 75% of the way up. I say percentages because every meter in every software is different. That will be a different volume level for you. If you really want to get geeky and get a RMS meter, you can look at the RMS volume, which is the average volume of your track, and get it around minus 16, minus 18 dB. RMS, okay, not peak level, because that will be super quiet, but the average volume is going to peak louder than that. This is peaking closer to like minus 6 or minus 8 or something, but the average volume of the track will be closer to minus 18. And so if you look closely, I've gone through on the snare top, I took it down 4.5 dB. Snare bottom took it down 6.5 dB. The toms I left the same. The room mic, I took it down 8.5 dB. The bass guitar, I took it down 4.6 dB. And I go through systematically, look at the meters, and see which tracks are hotter and which tracks are okay. And if it's okay, I leave it alone. Some of the guitars are real hot, so I pulled that down. And I just go through and pull the actual audio waves down so they're a more appropriate level before I do any balancing and before I do any plugins. If you send a really hot signal into your plugins, you won't get the sweetest sound out of your plugin that's possible. Just like analog equipment, actual compressors and EQs, they were meant to be operated and still are at a sweet spot where the VU meter is hitting 0 dB VU. And that was what you could see to know if you're hitting the sweet spot. Well, in the digital domain, it's really, really important to do this as well. You don't have as good of a tool to do that, but if you just at least pull the peak level down of your tracks on the clip level, you'll get a better sound. So don't skip gain staging. Very, very important before you process with any plugins. Now, I'm a big fan of mix bus processing, meaning I put plugins on my master fader. Here I have 1, 2, 3. This is just a trimmer tool. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 6 things that are processing my mix on the master fader level. Huge fan of that. It's called top-down mixing, and there's a reason why I like it. It really, really works. But today, one of the mistakes I see people making is if they do any processing on the master fader or the mix bus, they overdo it. So mistake number 4 is don't over-process on the mix bus. You can really abuse your track and ruin it if you do too much here. If you take a listen to what each one's doing, they're really not doing much to the mix individually. It's the cumulative effect. So I'm going to press play and bypass each little group here.
Here I go, far away from the shadows to a place where I belong. Born again, unchain me.
All 3 of those are pretty subtle. Same thing here with the tape machine.
Here I go, far away from the shadows to a place where I belong.
Very, very subtle, right? And the same would be true for these other 2. It's really the cumulative effect of all 6 of these processes that make a difference. I'll bypass all of them.
Here I go, far away from the shadows to a place where I belong. Born again, unchain me.
So when you're thinking about any mix bus processing, know that a little goes a long way here. I'm a big fan of processing here because you can really get a lot of bang for your buck, but you can also really kill your mix here, and I've done it too. So whenever you do anything on a group track like that, especially if it's the final master fader, the mix bus, please, please be subtle on each plugin that you use and allow the cumulative effect to really make a difference and allow it to just be that little push that your mix needs. Now, mistake number 3 is not level matching your EQs when you're mixing. And this could be true for almost any plugin, but it's especially true on EQ. EQ is so powerful, and it's, to me, the most important plugin that you have at your disposal because you're shaping and sculpting the tone of your mix. But if you don't level match the output of your EQ after you're done processing, you really actually have no idea if you're making the track better or worse because the level will be different. Most likely it'll be louder if you're typical where you're boosting too much. And you'll think, yeah, I've made it more exciting, more hyped, but you might have just made it louder. So the only way to know for sure is if you do a level match. Let me give you an example. Here on the piano, pull up the channel strip here. I've got EQ and compression happening on this, but I'm just going to focus on the EQ side. This will be the bypass button for just the EQ moves. Take a listen to the piano in solo, and you can see I've done one high pass filter here, a shelf boost up top, a notch boost in the upper mids, and then I did a notch cut right here at about 500. So I've done 2 boosts, 2 cuts. But I've also pulled the volume down here on the output, and I want to make sure that this is about the same volume as going in as it is going out. So we can hear the obvious change in tone, but it's the same volume. And that's what you're going for. You're going for a track that just changes tone with your EQ moves, doesn't change volume. So the flow I like to do it is make sure, and let's grab another EQ here just to sort of show another example. Here's the stock EQ. If I did any kind of boosts or cuts or filters on this track, whenever I'm done EQing, I want to make sure that the input meter matches the output meter. And if it doesn't, I'll grab the output knob and turn it down or up accordingly and listen and look. I want to do it visually, but also by ear. So when I bypass the EQ and bring it on or off, it's about the same volume. It's just the tone that's changing. This is so critical, like I said, to understand that you're actually helping the track with EQ and not just making it sound different or louder. Very, very important here. So don't make that mistake of not level matching your EQs. Another mistake people make is to not use automation. This was a mistake that I made for years. Automation to me was a little too complex and I just didn't want to deal with it. And probably because I'm just lazy, I wanted to just slap some plugins on and walk away from the mix and call it done. But every year I find myself using more and more automation. A couple years ago, I spent time with Jakir King, and the dude uses automation like a maniac, and it really gave me a new level of appreciation for automation. But there's so many ways to harness the power of it, and your DAW, your software, comes with it. Take a look at the piano, for example. Where are we here? Piano 1. This track, the goal here, and you can see my automation moves right over here. The goal here with automation is to make every moment of a track heard the way you want to. And even with some compression and even with setting at the right level, it's hard for every moment to pop out exactly the way you want, the way it should in a mix. And so you can use volume automation at its most basic to make every little chord or little nuance pop out. And so what I will do towards the end of a mix, and I recommend you do as well, is grab the volume fader and write in any automation I need on tracks where I feel like they're getting lost. Take a listen to this piano here. I brought the volume up right on that downbeat, leaving the pickup. I'm just kind of riding it with a vibe here. This little blip right here, this is just on the downbeat of the chorus. And right there, since there's no singing, I'm pushing the volume of the piano up to fill the space. Giving it life, right? And then going into this part, I pull it down, I think. This goes back now to the original volume, actually quieter than it was at the beginning because it's not as featured or doesn't need to be as featured when all the synths are in, okay? I bring it back here. Right there, this little do-do-do. I want to get those pickups going into the downbeat. And just that chord hit right there. And you can see what I'm doing. I'm using automation to bring the track out where it needs to be for the entire length of the song. And the mistake, my friend, is to not do this. This is such a great final step. If your mix is sounding good, you're so close. Go through each track and think about, what can I automate? What needs to be automated so that every little lick and nuance of a guitar or a lead vocal, I do this all the time on lead vocals, on bass guitar, whether it's a bass fill or a little note that's getting lost because the tone doesn't resonate the same way on a certain note. Drum fills, I'll make sure that every drum fill pops out the right way. The toms, the snare, maybe the cymbals need to be tucked down a little bit because it's a little harsh on a crash, but then you want to bring up the ride in a certain part. Automate those things because it's really hard for it to be the perfect volume just sitting there the whole time. So don't skip automation. And the number one mistake that I see people making when mixing in the home studio is not referencing a professional mix. Oh my goodness, if there's one thing I could tell you that will make you a better mixer, it is to reference, meaning pull in a really good sounding mix that you think sounds good. No one can tell you what's a good reference. You decide what sounds good to you on every speaker you've ever listened to, and what has a somewhat similar instrumentation to your song, so you can compare and actually bring it into your session. What I do is if I got all my tracks going through my Mixbus plugins here on this blue track here, that's all dumping out to this red master fader here, which has got no processing on it. This just goes straight to my speakers. Well, I will bring in a stereo audio track of another song. In this case, I think this was a James Bay song, because it had similar piano and drums driving the kick snare, just like this song, piano, pop, sort of rockish vocal. It was actually a track that Jakir did. And I brought it in because it was very similar. And two things you want to do. You want to put the volume fader way down on this track because it's going to be mastered, which means it's going to be much louder than your mix, and it's very hard to compare. So you pull the fader down till it's about the same volume as your mix, and you make sure that this reference is not going through your master fader plugins over here. That's why I have an additional master fader. So all my mix goes through these plugins and dumps out here, and then the reference can go dump out here. And I can literally compare all the work I'm doing, my mix, through my plugins, to a professional mix that I know sounds good, that's been signed off, that's been mastered, that's amazing, that's on the radio, that I know works and holds up on multiple systems. And I can compare them in my room, on my speakers, through my software and all its ones and zeros and coding and algorithms, through my converters of my interface, with all the imperfections of the whole chain. If your speakers aren't amazing, if your room's not treated, whatever the case, at least you can compare your mix to a reference that's really good sounding in your room. So now it's a fair comparison. So if your reference sounds like really flat, well, that means that you probably want to get your mix to sound closer to that, because that's really what a good mix will sound like in your room, on your speakers, and your converters out of your software from your listening position. So what I will do is flip back and forth to the reference and compare it to my mix, and I'm going to listen for 5 things. Here's a little bonus tip for you. When you're referencing, listen for 5 things. Listen to the level of the kick drum, and listen to the level of the snare drum. Listen to the level of the low end and what the low end sounds like. Listen to the level and the tone of the top end. What does it sound like? And finally, the lead vocal and lead vocal level. So kick, snare, lead vocal, low end, top end. You're not trying to match it perfectly. You're just trying to compare your mix to the reference mix and make sure that low end, top end, vocal level, kick, and snare are all very similar. At least you're in the ballpark. You can get really detailed and focus on guitars and mid-range and that kind of stuff and get specific tones, but you can never go wrong pulling in a reference, because it will tell you the truth about what good music should sound like from where you sit, and then you can pull your mix to be closer to it. There are the top 5 mixing mistakes that I'm seeing in home studio mixes. In review: not doing proper gain staging, going overboard on mix bus processing, not level matching your EQs, not using automation, and not referencing professional tracks. Those are the biggest mistakes I see. If you can avoid those, and if you can take even one of the things we talked about in today's video and apply it to your mixes, you will see massive improvement. Now, I want to give you a little gift as well. A huge part of mixing, like I said, is EQing. I mean, that's where most of your mix comes from, is your EQ decisions. And as we talked about level matching your EQs, a lot of people ask me, well, Graham, how do I know how to use EQ? How do I know what frequencies to use? How do I know how to approach EQ and what the different knobs do and how to think about EQ? Well, I've put together an EQ checklist for you to walk you through the 7 steps I think about when I'm applying EQ to my mixes. It's just a real simple way to call to mind the best way to approach EQ in your mix, and it'll get you going really quickly. Just go to eqchecklist.com. Put the link here in the description in the video. It's a simple 1-page PDF I think you can download. Might be 2. Download this PDF, print it up if you're old school like me, or have it on your phone or tablet, so when you're sitting down to do your next mix and you're thinking through these mistakes and you're ready to apply EQ, which is, like I said, where most of your mix comes from, you will know exactly how to think about EQ, how to use EQ, and how to not screw up your mix with EQ by referencing these 7 steps that I use. So go to eqchecklist.com. It's a real simple little guide for you. I think it'll really help you when you mix. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to these videos if you find them helpful, and I will see you on another video soon.